Her true story from Wyoming. On my birthday, my son abandoned me at a nursing home. A week later, I hit the lottery and never looked back. He said I was too much to handle. Turns out, I was too rich to chase. Your mom doesn't need love, she needs a facility. I had just dropped a glass of water. My hands were trembling from the arthritis that had crept in over the past few years. It slipped right out of my grip and shattered on the kitchen floor, scattering jagged shards across the tile. I stood there, frozen, ashamed, staring down like a child caught in a mess she did not mean to make. Before I could bend to pick up the pieces, I heard her voice, sharp, cold, and so casual it sliced through me like glass. You want to wipe her mouth for the rest of your life? Be my guest. But I say we drop her off and be done with it. My son did not answer right away. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Maybe he nodded. Maybe he looked away. I will never know. I only know that I stood on the other side of that kitchen doorway, invisible in the very house I once bled to build. The house still smelled like the wood polish I used every Saturday, back when Saturdays meant pancakes and cartoons and laundry on the line. The photos on the wall were ones I had hung, family vacations, graduations, Christmas mornings. And yet now, every corner felt foreign, like a museum where I was no longer allowed to touch the exhibits. I had been a nurse for 33 years. I had held the hands of dying children, stitched up drunk teenagers, and sat by countless bedsides where no family came. I had buried a husband and raised a son alone. I had balanced the checkbooks, fixed the roof twice, and even negotiated with the bank when we were 3 months behind on the mortgage. But none of that mattered anymore. Not to them. Now I was just the woman who dropped a glass. I remember the sound of the glass hitting the floor, more than the pain in my knees when I bent down. It was the sound of something breaking that could not be glued back. It was the moment I realized I was not a mother to them anymore. I was a mistake they were tired of fixing. I should have said something. I should have stepped into that kitchen, looked my son in the eye, and asked him where the hell his memory went. But I stayed silent. Not because I agreed, but because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, the only thing that would come out was a sob. There is a specific kind of humiliation that lives in silence. It is not loud or theatrical. It is the quiet sting of realizing you are no longer respected in the place you once ruled, with grace and grit. I watched my daughter-in-law step over the broken glass with a wrinkled nose, like my clumsiness had offended her personally. She tossed a dish towel toward the floor and walked away. My son followed her, no longer even looking at me. They did not see me crouch down to pick up the pieces with trembling hands. They did not see the cut I got on my palm or how I wiped the blood on my old housecoat. They did not hear the quiet apologies I whispered, not to them, but to myself, for staying this long, for believing I still mattered here. That night, I sat in the small guest room they had pushed me into 2 years ago. The walls were bare. No family photos. No smell of my favorite soap. Just a bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out onto a backyard I once gardened with joy. I thought about all the times I had said no to help, no to moving into assisted living, no to selling the house. I had said no because I thought being here, with my son, meant something. I thought love was stronger than inconvenience. But that day, in that kitchen, I understood something that took me almost 8 decades to learn. People do not always remember what you gave. They remember what you need. And once you start needing more than you can give, you become a burden. That is what I had become, a burden with shaky hands and a memory that sometimes fumbled for names. Later that night, I heard them laughing in the living room. My daughter-in-law's voice rang sharp, her words curling with that tone people use when they think old people cannot hear well. If she cannot even hold a fork anymore, what is the point? They laughed. They laughed while I sat upstairs, bleeding from a cut they did not notice, in a house I once filled with warmth. That was the night I stopped calling this place home. Crisis does not always come like a fire. Sometimes it walks in quiet, barefoot on familiar floors, and simply takes its place at the table. I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. My fingers throbbed, my pride did worse. The ache in my chest was not from age, it was from the truth. I had become something they tolerated, not someone they loved. And somewhere in the dark, I finally whispered the words I had been too ashamed to say aloud. They do not want me here. I was not just unwelcome, I was in the way. That realization hurt more than any cut, more than any fall I had ever taken, because it meant I had to face the truth I had been avoiding for months, maybe years. In the house I once built, with hands that had healed, cooked, comforted, and carried, that same house now saw me not as a person, but as a problem. And the worst part was not the betrayal. It was the understanding that this was not sudden. It had been growing, inch by inch, hidden under polite smiles and closed doors. I was no longer seen. I was no longer heard. I was just a spoon that slipped, a cup that broke, a mother who needed too much. I lay there in silence, knowing that tomorrow would bring something I could not stop. I just did not know yet that it would also bring something I could never have imagined. They told me we were going on a little trip for my birthday. A weekend retreat, my daughter-in-law had said too cheerfully. Just a little getaway. You deserve some pampering. My son added, "It's a nice place, Mom, real quiet. They've got gardens, good food, even book clubs." I wanted to believe them. I really did. After everything, I clung to the small hope that maybe, just maybe, they remembered who I used to be, that I was still worth celebrating, that 79 years of living, of giving, meant something. So I packed carefully. I chose my nicest blouse, the one with the delicate lace collar my late husband had always liked. I brought along 2 books I had been saving for a quiet day, and a pair of thick wool socks that kept my feet warm at night. I even added a small tin of lavender lotion I had been saving for a special occasion. This, I told myself, was special. I imagined a quiet cabin in the mountains, maybe tea in the afternoons, maybe someone bringing me a slice of cake while my son smiled and said, "You've earned this, Mom." That morning I sat by the window in my coat, hands folded, heart hopeful. They loaded my suitcase into the trunk, and I held on to that hope all the way through the 2-hour drive. But when the car turned into a gated drive, my chest tightened. It was not a resort. It was not a cabin. It was a facility, the kind with beige walls, faded signs, and too many windows locked from the inside. I looked at my son, confused. He avoided my gaze. "We'll check you in real quick, just for the weekend," he mumbled, as if the words tasted bitter. My heart pounded. My hands gripped my bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. Something was wrong. Everything in me screamed that this was not what they said. Inside, the smell of bleach and old linens met me like a slap. A woman behind the counter smiled politely, but her eyes darted from me to the clipboard in front of her. My son whispered to her. I caught only fragments. "Stays quiet. Some forgetfulness. Family emergency next week." They led me to a room with pale yellow walls and a single bed made military tight. There was a plastic chair by the window, a television bolted to the wall, and no hint of celebration. No balloons, no cake, no music. I turned to my son. "Where are we?" I asked. "It's just for a few days," he said, too quickly. "We'll come back. Just get some rest." Then he set down my small bag, just one. Not my suitcase, not the one with my books or my socks or the blouse I had ironed, just a tote bag, like I was staying overnight, like I had not spent my life packing lunchboxes and healing fevers and holding this boy through the darkest nights of his life. I opened my mouth to speak, but the air had left it. Before I could protest, he kissed the top of my head and said, "Take care, okay?" And just like that, they left. No explanation, no goodbye, no birthday wishes. I sat on the edge of the bed, numb, as the door clicked shut behind them. A few minutes later, a nurse walked in. Young, polite, and clearly uncomfortable. She handed me a clipboard. "Your son signed the paperwork. You're on a full-time care plan, Mrs. Gardner. Indefinite stay. He said you were aware." I stared at her. "Aware," I whispered. She shifted awkwardly. "Sometimes the transition is hard." I looked down at the paper. My name, my date of birth, my medical history, my son's signature. Indefinite, indefinite, indefinite. The word echoed in my head like a scream in a hollow cave. I clutched the arms of the plastic chair. My breathing got shallow. Not from age, not from illness, but from rage. They planned this. This was not a retreat, not a getaway. It was an exile, a removal. They dressed it up with lies and fake smiles and the promise of rest, but it was nothing more than abandonment. wrapped in a bow. In that moment, I was not a mother. I was a task completed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip up that paper, to storm out into the parking lot and demand they take me home, but they were already gone. The tin of lavender lotion sat unopened in the bag. My books, my socks, my carefully folded blouse, they were still at home. My home. The one they'd just removed me from without a second thought. I looked out the window, past the manicured garden, and into the dying light of a Wyoming afternoon. Snow was starting to dust the hills. It looked peaceful. Beautiful, even. But all I could feel was betrayal. They had calculated this. Not an impulse, not a desperate decision. They packed my bag. They lied to my face. They timed it for my birthday so they would not feel guilty. That was the worst part. They wanted to feel good about what they did. I sat alone in that pale room, knees cold, heart burning, and screamed inside my chest. I screamed without a sound, because what mother wants to admit her own child would rather erase her than honor her. I did not cry, not that day, but something inside me cracked, and this time, it would not be glued back. The room smelled like disinfectant and despair. It clung to everything, the curtains, the sheets, even my skin. A sharp, sterile scent meant to signal cleanliness, but never comfort. The kind of smell that told you, this is a place for endings, not beginnings. Every morning began the same way. A knock at the door, a nurse too cheerful for the hour, a reminder that today was oatmeal again. They called it a care facility, but the care felt more like management. Routines, rotations, regulated pills in plastic cups, faces changed shift by shift, but the tone stayed the same, gentle, practiced, emotionally detached. I never caused trouble. That was important to me. I took my medicine without complaint. I smiled when they asked if I was feeling okay today. I sat through the group TV hour, even when the channel was something I had no interest in. But inside, I was taking inventory. Every comment, every glance, every sigh when someone asked to be helped to the bathroom. We were not people here. We were tasks. I sat through lunches in the cafeteria, where the tables were filled with other women like me. Some quiet, some confused, some clinging to memories that played on repeat. I watched the aides serve food, then retreat to their phones. I saw the way they spoke to some of the more frail women, with exaggerated baby talk, as if age had stripped us of dignity. And I remembered my daughter-in-law's voice. If she cannot even hold a fork anymore, what is the point? She had said it with a laugh. A joke, supposedly. But it was a truth in her heart. That fork, that glass, that trembling hand, that was all it had taken to convince them I was no longer useful. No longer a matriarch, or a caregiver, or a person of worth. Just another expense in the spreadsheet of their lives. In the hallway outside my room, there was a bulletin board decorated with cutout leaves and construction paper pumpkins. Fall into friendship, it read. Below it were sign-up sheets for bingo, chair yoga, and memory games. I stared at it one afternoon and wondered how long I would have to be here before I gave in and wrote my name, but I could not do it. Not because I was better than this place, not because I thought I was above the others, but because I was still mourning something no one else could see. The moment I stopped being someone's mother and became someone's burden. There was a woman across the hall, maybe 10 years older than me, who spent her afternoons staring out the window and whispering names. I asked her once who she was talking to. She said, all the people who said they'd visit. That stayed with me. She was not angry, not bitter, just waiting, hoping. And I realized I had already let that hope die. I was not waiting for my son, not for a birthday card, not for an apology. I was waiting for something else. Not revenge, not yet, just clarity. Every night, as I lay in my narrow bed under the thin blanket, I repeated her words, all the people who said they'd visit. I imagined all the mothers, grandmothers, wives who had sat in this same bed, looking at the same crack in the ceiling, wondering where their lives had gone. And I knew then I was not the first woman to be quietly discarded by the very people she had lived for. It was a strange kind of comfort. Misery, as they say, loves company. But I was not miserable. I was furious. And beneath that fury, something unexpected. Focus. I had spent the past few years apologizing for needing help, for being old, for taking up space. No more. If they wanted to forget me, fine. Let them. I would not forget. And I would not forgive. My hands still shook. My memory still skipped sometimes, like a record with a scratch. but my mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in months, because now I knew exactly where I stood. I was in a room that smelled like antiseptic and hopelessness. But I was not broken. Not yet, not even close. It was on the third Thursday, I think. Or maybe the fourth. Time moved differently in that place. Slow, syrupy, and without punctuation. I was looking through the small bookshelf in the common area, the one where residents donated old paperbacks and large print magazines. Most of the titles were mysteries or devotionals, dog-eared and dusty, the kind of books people left behind when they thought they would not need them anymore. Tucked behind a copy of Wuthering Heights was a thicker novel, cloth-bound, faded blue, the collected works of Emily Dickinson. I recognized it instantly. It was mine, not just the same edition. Mine. My name was on the inside cover, written in Helen's handwriting, still neat even after all these years. I sat down hard in the armchair by the window, heart pounding like I had seen a ghost. She had given me that book on my 21st birthday, back when we were both still working at the hospital in Cheyenne. She was a nurse too, sharp, funny, fearless in a way I never quite managed to be. Helen had loved me once. I knew it, even though we never spoke it aloud. Not because she said anything, but because of all the things she never had to. The way she made me soup when I had the flu. The way she looked away when I brought up the man who would become my husband. The way she wrote me letters, even after I married him and moved away. I opened the book slowly, like it might crumble. Between pages 112 and 113 was a folded envelope, yellowed but sealed. I stared at it for a long time before breaking the seal. Inside was a letter, dated nearly 15 years ago. My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, then life has brought you low enough to search for something soft, even if it is just paper and memory. I do not know where you are or how old we are now, but I know one thing. You deserved better. Not from me, I think I did love you as best I could, but from the world, from life, from whatever cruel hand has made you feel small again. So here is something I bought on a whim. A lottery ticket. Silly, I know. But if the world is going to be unfair, maybe luck can even the scales. The numbers are mine, but the hope is for you. If you ever feel like life has taken everything, try this, just once, just in case the universe owes you something back. With more love than I ever said aloud, Helen. Taped to the bottom of the page was a folded lottery ticket, brittle at the edges, numbers printed faintly. I did not cry, I laughed, not from joy, and not from delusion, but from the absurdity of it all. Even from the grave, even after decades apart, Helen still believed I was worth more than I had settled for. It was not about the numbers. It was about the faith that someone out there, someone long gone, still thought I deserved one last gift. I held the ticket between my fingers and looked out the window. Snow had started to fall again, soft flakes dancing against the gray sky. The wind moved the branches of the trees in the courtyard, like they were waving. I could almost hear her voice. I hope you win, Ruth, I really do. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something other than anger or grief. I felt remembered, not by my son, not by the people who should have protected me, but by someone who had loved me in silence, in waiting, in letters no one else knew about. The nurses passed by, wheeling carts, calling names, checking vitals, the usual hum of this quiet prison. But I sat there in that chair with a folded piece of paper in my hand and a pulse in my chest that beat just a little louder than it had the day before, because hope, ridiculous, fragile, foolish hope, had returned. Not because of luck, because of love. It was a Saturday afternoon when the world shifted. I was sitting in the common room, the one with the vinyl armchairs that stuck to the backs of your legs and the TV mounted too high on the wall. Most of the residents had dozed off, their heads tilted back, mouths slightly open, a soft chorus of snores filling the stale air. A nurse was flipping through channels with little interest, landing finally on the local news, just in time for the lottery numbers. I did not lean forward. I did not expect anything. I had tucked Helen's ticket into my coat pocket more out of ritual than belief. But I watched. The numbers came up slowly, one by one, like they always do. 6, 14, 22. My hand tightened around the paper. 33, 41. I stopped breathing. 54. For a moment, everything was still. I unfolded the old slip of paper from my pocket. The ink had faded a little, but the numbers were clear. I read them again, then again, a fourth time. All 6 numbers, every single one. I had won. No one noticed. The nurse kept flipping channels. One of the residents stirred in her sleep. Somewhere down the hallway, someone coughed, but in my chest, a drum was pounding, steady and fast and hard to believe. I stood up slowly, as if the floor might drop out from under me. My knees were weak, but not from age, from possibility. Back in my room, I closed the door, sat down on the bed, and stared at the ticket. Not a dream, not a prank. $87 million. The air felt different, heavier but lighter all at once, as if the walls of the facility were suddenly too small to hold me. I picked up the small flip phone my son had given me 2 years ago, the one I barely used, the one they probably hoped I would forget how to operate. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. I knew exactly who I was calling. Michael Thompson, attorney at law, a former student of mine from when I taught nursing part-time. He had always been bright, respectful, and just rebellious enough to think a woman like me was worth listening to. When he answered, his voice cracked with surprise. "Mrs. Gardner?" "Hello, Michael," I said. "I need your help, and your absolute discretion." He came to see me that evening, no questions asked. I had him meet me in the rear garden courtyard, where the cameras could not see and the nurses rarely bothered to look. I showed him the ticket. He blinked, swallowed, then smiled in a way that was all professionalism and a little boyish awe. "Is this real?" he asked. "As real as the silence in this place," I said. We got to work immediately. He made arrangements to claim the prize through a blind trust. Everything routed carefully, quietly, so that my name would not appear in headlines. We used Helen's initials as the trust's name. I told him I wanted it all handled within a week, and I wanted full control. Then came the second part. "I want you to find out who owns my old house," I told him. "And I want to buy it." He tilted his head. "Under your name?" "No," I said. "Under the trust. I do not want them to know it is me. Not yet." Michael nodded slowly. "You want to stay hidden until the right moment," I said. He made the calls. I watched him from across the courtyard, the autumn wind brushing leaves along the path like whispers. I did not smile. Not yet. I was still holding it all in, every bruise from every word that had stripped me of value. By Monday, the transaction was underway. My account under the Helen R. Trust had been credited with the winnings. The house was in the process of being purchased. My son and daughter-in-law had no idea the buyer was me. I requested one final thing: relocation. Michael helped coordinate a transfer out of the nursing facility. A private healthcare advocate signed the papers, citing a new premium care residence on file. I left without a goodbye. They offered to pack my things, but I told them I had everything I needed. In truth, I did not want anything from that place to follow me. The car that picked me up was warm, leather-seated, with a thermos of hot tea in the cup holder. I rode with my eyes open, watching the hills of Wyoming roll past like old memories. I thought of Helen, of her laughter, her letter, the fact that she had given me this final push, this quiet revolution. When we reached my new home, a modest cabin on private land, surrounded by birch trees and silence, I stepped out, closed my eyes, and breathed in freedom. For the first time in over 30 years, I did not have to ask permission to go outside. I did not have to explain why I needed more time, more space, more love. I did not have to apologize for the body that had aged or the mind that had slowed. I was not a burden. I was not a patient. I was not a guest. I was the owner. I stood on the porch, warm mug in hand, and watched the sun set, without anyone calling me inside or checking their watch or sighing with impatience. The quiet was not lonely. It was mine, and I exhaled, because I had not just won the lottery. I had reclaimed my life. The cabin was small, but it was enough. It sat on a quiet stretch of land by the lake, hidden behind birch trees that whispered with every breeze. The water reflected the sky like it had nothing to prove. No one knew I was there, and for the first time in years, no one expected anything from me. The mornings were mine. I made tea slowly, savoring the sound of the kettle. I read books without being interrupted. I walked by the water, wrapped in a shawl Helen had given me decades ago, and let the cold bite my cheeks. No calls, no caretakers, no condescension, only peace. Meanwhile, 3 towns over, My son received a letter he never expected. The house, the one I built with my husband's hands, the one where I raised him, comforted him, fed him, had been sold. The new owner, operating through a holding company, was raising the rent by nearly triple. Sudden, legal, and final. Michael had ensured everything was airtight. There would be no loopholes, no negotiation. The trust owned the property, and the trust wanted a new tenant or a clean exit. They panicked. They called the real estate office, begging to speak to the owner. They demanded explanations, tried to guilt the agent into reconsideration, but no one at that office knew who I was. On paper, I was no one. They were told, simply, the terms are non-negotiable, you have 30 days. I watched it all unfold from a secure login Michael set up. The front door camera still fed to a cloud server. He made sure I had access. I saw my daughter-in-law standing on the porch, waving a letter in the air, furious. My son behind her, phone to his ear, face pale. Boxes started appearing within a week. They had nowhere to go. Their lifestyle was too inflated, their savings too thin. They had spent the last 2 years living like royalty in a castle they never owned. And now, the castle had evicted them. I watched as they hauled boxes down the steps I had scrubbed on my hands and knees for 20 years. I watched them argue over what to keep and what to toss. I watched them fill a dumpster with things I once considered heirlooms, and I did not smile. Not because I was soft, but because it was not satisfaction I felt. It was justice. There is a difference between revenge and balance. I was not trying to hurt them. I was simply reclaiming the space they stole from me. They had made their choice. They turned me into a transaction, and so I responded in kind. The house became a number on a spreadsheet. The rent became a line on an invoice. They wanted to treat me like an inconvenience. Now the inconvenience had sent them packing. As they drove away in a rented moving truck, I closed the laptop and looked out over the lake. A duck skimmed the surface, leaving a gentle wake behind it. I did not cry. I did not cheer. I just sat there, hands warm around my mug, and let the silence settle. There was no need for a speech. No need for a final confrontation. They would never know who did this, and they would never know why. But I did. I knew. And for me, that was enough. The day before the cleaning crew arrived, I sent one final delivery to the house. A small envelope, no return address. Inside, a single piece of stationery from the desk I now kept by the cabin window. Cream-colored, thick, the kind Helen used to write on. I wrote the message slowly, with a pen that had belonged to my husband. The ink flowed smooth, steady, certain. I folded the note once, then again, placed it in the envelope and sealed it. No name, no signature, just the words I had waited too long to say. Michael arranged the drop-off. The courier was instructed to leave it taped to the front door. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The message read, "Too much to handle? Turns out, you were too cheap to forgive." It was the only thing I left behind. I never heard their reaction. I did not want to. It was not for them. It was for me. They had called me difficult, needy, fragile, inconvenient, but I had never once raised my voice. I had never once slammed a door or thrown a plate or made them feel half as small as they made me feel every single day. They said I was too much, and yet they took everything I had to give, my time, my history, my home, and still decided I was not worth the effort of kindness. So I left them the only thing they left me, cold truth. It was not a plea for closure. Not a cry for reconciliation. It was a ledger, balanced, paid in full. They had made me feel disposable, forgettable. They forgot, of course, that some things don't break when you drop them. Some things sharpen. That paper on their door, it was not revenge. It was a mirror, and if they looked at it long enough, they would see exactly what they had become. I never signed my name. They did not deserve it. They had already erased me from their lives, long ago. I simply returned the favor, not with hate, with precision. I was not taking back love. I was returning absence, one silent envelope at a time. No one knows my name here, and for the first time in a long time, I am grateful for that. The cabin sits just far enough from town that the mail arrives in a bundle every few days. I walk down the narrow path each morning to collect it, wrapped in a shawl, boots crunching on frost-bitten grass. It is a quiet ritual, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to me, it is freedom. Each morning begins the same way. I boil water for tea, slice an apple, and sit by the window with a book in my lap. I read slowly now, not because I have trouble understanding, but because I finally have time to savor each sentence, The world no longer rushes me. No one calls my name with urgency. No one checks a clock and sighs when I speak. I am not a burden here. I am not anything to anyone, and that is its own kind of peace. Some afternoons I write letters, not to my son, not to the people who left me behind. I write to women like me, to names I find in articles, in local obituaries, in forums online, women who were discarded, sidelined. I never send the letters directly. I work through small nonprofits now, quiet, underfunded organizations that still believe in handwritten notes and second chances. They deliver my messages to nursing homes across the state, folded neatly with care packages I fund anonymously. Sometimes it is just a blanket. Sometimes it is a framed photo of a garden. Sometimes it is a note that says, "You're not forgotten. You are not a mistake. You are not alone." No one knows where the money comes from. The checks arrive signed by the Helen R. Trust, and that is enough. I sponsor music hours, new mattresses, holiday meals. I fund transportation so residents can attend church or just visit a park. These are small things, but to people who have been made to feel small, they matter. They matter deeply. I do not want my name on a plaque. I do not want recognition. I just want the silence we are shoved into, us older women, us mothers, us widows, to feel a little less like a sentence and a little more like a choice. Sometimes, when I walk by the lake, I think about what would have happened if Helen's letter had never found me, if that ticket had never been folded between pages, if I had never been reminded, by someone long gone, that I was still worthy of a better ending. That thought stops me cold every time, because it means there are others still waiting, still sitting alone in quiet rooms, still believing they are too much to handle. And that is why I keep writing, not for closure, not for anger, but to keep their stories and mine alive, one letter at a time, one act of quiet defiance at a time. I do not know where my son is now. I do not ask. I do not check. I do not wonder if he thinks of me, as I am no longer holding out for love that has an expiration date. Some kinds of love are loud and shiny and easy to claim, but the kind that lasts, it is patient, it is quiet. It is the kind that hides a lottery ticket in an old poetry book, just in case. It is the kind that sends blankets to strangers you will never meet, just to remind them they are not invisible. It is the kind that carries no name, but leaves a mark anyway. In the evenings, when the sun disappears behind the hills, I light a candle and sit by the fire. The flames crackle softly. I sip my tea and listen to the wind move through the trees. No one calls, no one knocks, and I am not lonely. I am whole, because I know now that I was never too much. I was simply too strong for small hearts, too sharp for shallow people, too real for those who only wanted me quiet. They could not handle me because they never tried to understand me, and that is not my shame. That is theirs. I do not need them to know I am doing well. I do not need them to wonder where I am. I do not need them to see me happy. I just need to know that at long last, I am living a life that feels like mine. One without apology, one without fear, and without needing to ask if I am allowed. And that is enough. It is more than enough. Because after all this time, I finally believed the one truth I used to whisper to myself when the lights were off and the house was silent. I do not need them to know I lived well. I just need to know I lived right. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart even just a little, know that you are not alone. Somewhere out there, someone else has felt forgotten, betrayed, or left behind, just like I once did. But remember this, silence is not the end. Sometimes it is just the beginning of a louder kind of truth. If you believe in stories that matter, real stories from the quietest women in the room, then subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here we don't shout, we remember, we reveal, and we remind the world. Revenge has no expiration date. Wisdom doesn't scream, it endures. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens. Click subscribe and join a community where the forgotten are finally heard.